at me, but it's just one of those days. Just one of those days. It's just one of those days, nothing goes your way. It's just one of those days. Well, I locked my keys in the car. Well, that's the third time this week so far. It's just one of those days. Just one of those days. It's just one of those days, nothing goes your way. It's just one of those days. Just one of those days. The sun don't seem to shine, and you wish you could rewind and just go back to yesterday. It's just one of those days. Well, my wife called me up in tears and said she just rolled the car and she thinks it's dead. But it's just one of those days. Just one of those days. It's just one of those days, nothing goes your way. It's just one of those days. Well, I told my wife I'm feeling stressed. She said, we got a letter from the IRS. But it's just one of those days. Just one of those days. It's just one of those days, nothing goes your way. It's just one of those days. Just one of those days. The sun don't seem to shine, and you wish you could rewind and just go back to yesterday. It's just one of those. Just one of those days, the sun don't seem to shine, and you wish you could rewind and just go back to yesterday. It's just one of those. It's just one of those. Hey everybody, sorry about that. This is Riley Hendrickson with Rilo's Quack Chat. Let's see if I remembered to put the right card in. Let's see if we got the intro. We do! Here we go. This is Rilo's Quack Chat. As a call maker, I enjoy talking shop with other duck call makers. On this podcast, it's all about duck calls and duck hunting. From the marsh to the duck call shop, we're going to find the story behind the duck calls and the people that make them. This is Rilo's Quack Chat. Oh, hey everybody, how's it going? It is a awesome evening. Man, it's starting to get a little cold out there. I'm looking really forward to this duck season because I was told I think we're going to be getting down to the 50s this week here in Indiana. It was a little warmer today, but you can just feel it in the air. We're getting closer to duck season. We're getting closer to fall for sure. Everyone, if you are looking at the screen right now, I don't really have to introduce this guy, but I'll tell you what about, let's see here, about 15 or 16 years ago, right around the time I started making duck calls, I was looking at I was like, man, as I'm working, they allowed us to listen to one earbud and listen to a podcast. And I was like, man, I wonder if there's a waterfowl podcast. Well, there was. The first one I clicked on, it had a picture of a duck. I clicked on, and I'm like, well, I'll listen to the latest episode. And I clicked on, and the host, Phil Conkey, had this gentleman on, who was Ryan Graves, and Ryan Graves actually came back and was a co-host on the podcast. If you get a chance, check those out. It's called the Shooting Time Podcast. Great podcast, love it. But I mean, there are a couple of guys right now that have awesome collections in certain places and just know their stuff about duck calls, and this is just one of those guys, and it is such a huge honor to have Mr. Ryan Graves on. How are you doing, Ryan?
Man, I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Man, thank you so much. I mean, there is just, when you get into like the metal read culture and like and then you get into like the collecting side, and so some of these guys that just have these collections, I mean, your collections are just fantastic. I've seen some photos. I mean, it's just a whole nother world, man.
Yeah, it really is. As a nostalgic person, it's, I really enjoy messing and collecting with these old duck calls for sure.
Yeah, it's right now it's kind of funny because, I mean, like right before I hopped on here, I saw that someone is taking, it's funny how nostalgia does like a circle and we go right back to it. I mean, there's a guy that's literally taking shows and bootlegging them and putting them on VHS. And I mean, if you go to like Walmart or places, vinyl's making a comeback. And so now in the call community, with Fred Rowe jigs being made right now, or that were made, and a bunch of people got their hands on, there's starting to be a little bit of a Mel Reed revival, and we'll see just how many pop up at Reelfoot. I mean, what do you think about that guys are getting back into Mel Reed calls?
Well, honestly, as a nostalgic person, I think it's I think it's neat.
Yeah.
There's there's no telling how many plastic reed call makers are out there, and I think it's a cool niche. I think it's cool. A friend of mine, Chris Williamson from, he makes duck calls, iron and oak duck calls.
Mm-hmm.
I know he started doing some metal reeds lately, and I mean, they're cool. They're, and it's a little bit different. And I mean, if I had a chance to buy an old, or not, I'm talking about an old duck call, but if I had a chance to buy a metal reed duck call right now, or a plastic reed, I'd probably buy a metal just because they're just kind of nostalgic, and I kind of go after nostalgic stuff.
Yeah. Do you ever make your way over to Reelfoot, to the festival down there? Have you ever been there?
Oh yeah, I only live, about 45 minutes from Reelfoot Lake, so
Really?
I've been going to that. I've been going to that show since the early 2000s. Um, I try to go every year, but sometimes, I go to Canada every year hunting, and it just really just depends on whether I make it or not, when our Canada trip is, and you know, um, as I'm a school teacher, and our usually go on our fall break, and our fall break's usually always the first full week of October, and like I said, that's usually when I go to Canada. So it just depends on when it falls. Now, like I say, this year, I know I won't be there because it falls during our, um, I mean, it falls the same week as, like I said, our fall break. So, but I won't be there this year. But hopefully everything will line. I'll be able to go back next year.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, man, one of these years, it would be cool to get you as maybe a judge, like for the calling contest, because as far as Reelfoot goes, I'm sure you know what that traditional sound's supposed to sound like.
I mean, I guess I probably do.
Yeah.
I'm, the funny part is as close as I lived to Reelfoot, I've really only been out there hunting a couple times, and that's during the September wood duck season. But I just have a club that I hunt with, and we're not too far from Reelfoot, but like I say, it's never never really hunted it during big duck season.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so I mean, obviously I've heard the old videos, and stuff about the old ways Reelfoot people called. But as far as ever doing it, I have not.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. It's just cool. I think it's just, I'm really eager to see what happens in the next couple years with people making more Mel Reeds. It's just awesome. But let's talk about I've had so many people contact me and go, "You've had so many call makers on. When are we going to get a collector?" And they're like, Ryan Graves. I mean, your name has come up so many times. And then when I saw that picture of you, or the video of you taking those forgeries in your hand and throwing them away, I was like, yeah, we need to get Ryan on. But before we get to all that, I mean, has collecting just always been your thing? Have you always been into collecting before duck calls?
Yeah, I always tell everybody, like, collecting is like a personality trait. You're either born with a nostalgic gene, or you're not.
Mm-hmm.
I've collected something. I'll be 46 in December. I've always collected something my entire life. My parents are collectors. My dad collects old cars, and my mom collects just Americana, and just I've just always been a collector. As a kid, I collected baseball cards. And I collected, matchbooks, like, really just anything that I could ever find that was old. And like I say, when I collected baseball cards, I never, as a kid, I never went to the local market or anything and bought, that year of Topps cards or anything. I always saved up my money, and I bought Mickey Mantles and the older stuff. So I've just always had a knack for, things from the past.
Mm. Yeah. So, I mean, if you just naturally have that personality, I mean, it just lines right up with it. When did you start collecting duck calls? I mean, were you duck hunting before you were collecting duck calls?
Yeah. First and foremost, I'm a duck hunter. Probably as avid as one can get. And for me, like, in the late, I started hunting in the early to mid 90s, or started taking it serious. I had gone some before that, but I don't come from a hunting family, so I didn't particularly have my own spot to go. And some invites I went on with some friends that were Boy Scouts and stuff like that. Then once I got into early high school is when I really started, like, taking it serious.
Mm-hmm.
And so in those time frames, I was still collecting old baseball cards, and I would go to flea markets and stuff like that. I was born and raised in Marion, Illinois, which is just really about an hour and a half north of where I live now. But the first Sunday of every month, there was a flea market in DuQuoin, Illinois, at the fairgrounds, and I'd go up there looking for baseball cards, and if I saw duck calls, I'd buy them. Then I ended up, I would say probably 96, 97, I ended up getting a copy of the book, Duck Calls of Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
And, once I got that, it's been pretty much hammered down ever since then.
Yeah. It's, man, I'll tell you what, collecting it's just, it can be addictive, because then you get a list of what you want and you chase after that list, and it's really cool to see some of these young collectors. Like the first one that comes to mind is the kid Tucker Sherrod. I mean, he found a ham bone in an antique shop and paid $5 for it, which is a newer call, but still, that's a find,
Yeah, that's a great find, and I have the utmost respect for Tucker. I met him a few years ago at a show, and he's we've become buddies, and taking him under my wing, and trying to, I mean, everybody, in order to do this and do it the right way, everybody's got to have a mentor. I had a mentor. Mine was, Bob Christensen, that was the author of the book Duck Calls of Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, calling him in the early 90s. Well, I'm sorry, not the early 90s, the early 2000s, when, I had found some old duck calls, and we've just been friends ever since. I mean, he texted me, less than a minute ago, asking me about something about a call, and and I just, and he kind of, I'm not gonna say, showed me the ropes or anything, but he let me know what things to look out for, and to be cautious of, and what to look for, and just just gave me suggestions on what to collect, what not to collect, but by saying that, though, the one thing about collecting is the main rule in collecting is you get to collect what you want to collect.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I'm one of those people that I don't do anything half-ass. If I'm going to collect, then I'm going to collect, and I'm going to collect the best stuff. And I'll tell you, it's been a fun journey. I mean, there's no telling how many times I've ran myself to, in debt and all that to get what I've got. But it's worth it. It's worth it to me, at least. Like my wife says, though, this stuff's worth nothing when you won't refuse to sell any of it. So.
Right. Right. It's yeah. But still, I mean, some of those old, the calls I find the most fascinating have got to be the unknown calls. And like some of the pictures of the unknown makers that you sent me, oh my goodness gracious.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that. I mean, unknown calls are probably some of my favorites. A couple of my top 5 favorite calls that I own are unknowns.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I would, if I could find out who made them, which I know I never will. That information has been lost to time, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. The calls stand on their own. It'd be nice to know who made them, but I mean, I've probably got north of 60 unknown calls. I don't shy away. Some collectors will shy away from them, and I mean, and I don't at all. I mean, I actually pursue them, and and a lot of people don't understand that. Like, well, how do you not know who made this, or because one unfortunate part about the hobby is there's some collectors that have the mindset that you never sell a duck call without putting a name on it.
Right.
So unfortunately, there's a lot of misattributed calls out there in the market. That are really technically truly unknowns, but they'll say it's an early, Purdue, or it's an early Beckard, or and that's just to try to get more money out of it. I mean, I have just some great calls, and I mean, one thing I will never do is attribute a name to them if I have no idea who made them.
Yeah.
And there's calls I have that I think I might know who made them, but I can't prove it, so I just and it's not that big, misattributing the call or attributing a call that is is not all that big a deal if it's something you're trying to keep or something you're keeping for your collection. When it becomes a big deal is when you're trying to sell it to somebody.
Yeah.
And trying to make it something that it's not. Now, and there's a lot of things too that there might be calls that are maybe what somebody might think it is, but man, you just have to on some of that stuff, you just have to go with consistency on, because I mean, all call making, I guess you're a call maker, so everybody does different things and they've done different things in their call making career. The one thing you just have to focus on when identifying some of these old things is just consistency on they might have shaped the shape of the barrel and the stopper different, but one thing that'll be consistent is reed material, tone board construction, stuff like that. So
yeah, but I mean, even then, I mean, there's quite a difference between like a Fred Allen and Grubbs, or Grubbs and Beckhart were both, I mean, I'm pretty sure both of those were 3/4 bore barrels with traditional stopper, right? And Fred Allen was more Louisiana. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, to be quite honest with you, I'm not 100% sure on the bore size. Like, one thing when it comes to, I'm not a call maker. I mean, it's literally something I have zero interest in.
Mm-hmm.
I those that do, but one thing I do like to do, I like to checker. I taught myself how to checker years ago, and so I helped my buddy Chris at Iron and Oak, checker some calls and stuff like that. So I mean, I do enjoy doing that, but help me out. I lost my train of thought. It's been a long day.
We were, yeah, you're asking the wrong person, because I lose my train of thought. I was looking down, saw Tucker Sherrod tuned in. Tucker, we were just talking about you. But and anyone, real quick before we move on, make sure if you have any questions for Ryan, leave a comment, and before the end of the podcast, I will ask him those questions. Okay, so if you have any questions about anything, leave them at the bottom, and we'll throw them at Ryan.
We're talking about bores on old calls.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I really don't even pay attention to that, stuff a whole lot. And like saying, I'm not great at, knowing all the fancy woods and all that, because, I primarily only have an interest in, pre-1950 duck calls. So, so back then, they were usually hedge, walnut, and a few cedar calls. There was, not really, maybe just and one or two ebony calls out there, but so I can tell you, wedge or hedge and walnut and cedar and stuff, but I'm not good at, people send me, fancy wood calls all the time, don't know what kind of wood it is, and I'm not the person to ask.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm a traditionalist. I just like walnut. I'm very boring. But it's what it is, I like walnut and cedar for the most part. Yep. But I mean, so real quick, this just hit me, this question. What is the best collecting story you have? Have you ever had a phone call from someone like, Grandpa had these in his drawer, or like, have you ever had a picking moment where someone was like, I think there were some duck calls up in the attic or out in the barn? Do you have any good collecting stories?
I mean, I've got many, collecting stories. I could talk about them all night, but one of the the most surprising ones, that really stands out to me as kind of being comical was it was maybe 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. I get on my Instagram page, I get a private message from a really attractive gal from Los Angeles, California, trying to sell me a Beckhart duck call. And I thought, man, you know, a pretty woman and an old duck call, like, I'm fixing to really get screwed here, but I mean, at first I thought I was getting, because I get that I guess everybody probably does on their social media. You get those private messages from, it's always a girl or something, call this number, just stupid stuff. So I kind of figured that's what it was. And
Mm-hmm.
so she sent me these pictures of it. And so I thought, man, and I've got a photographic memory. Like, I'm blessed to have it. Someday I'll probably lose it. But, I can pretty much tell you when I've seen an old duck call when I haven't. And when she sent it to me, I'm like, I've seen this call before, or I've never seen this call before. I don't, if I had, it would have stood out to me. So I told her, I said, you know what? I asked her a lot of questions, and I said, if this is seriously your duck call, I said, I want you to take and write your name and my name on a piece of paper and put it underneath it and send me a picture. I mean, it wasn't 20 seconds later, she sent it to me. And I thought, man, so, we talked and, a little bit. And I'm like, so, I mean, well, what's the story on this duck call? And she said it was, her grandpa was, from Phoenix, Arizona. And she inherited something that had this duck call in it. And when she got it out of the box, she did not even know what it was. Didn't even know there was a duck call. She didn't even know what a duck call was, but on the very top of it, it was stamped JT Beckhart. So she typed in JT Beckhart in Google, and it took her to the article that I wrote for Mossy Oak years back on JT Beckhart. But anyways, come to find out, it was the easiest transaction that one of the easiest transactions I've ever made for an old duck call. I made her an offer. I made her a very strong offer at, twice what she thought it was worth. Ended up getting it bought. And, I mean, it was not, I wired her to the money. I told her I wanted to do it through PayPal so I could have a little assurance.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't an hour later, I got an email from UPS, and there was a tracking number, and she'd mailed it, in next day air on her dime. And I got the call, and I'll be honest with you, it's probably one of the nicest ones I'd ever held. One of the standard model Beckharts. And and I felt the need to apologize to her. I told her, I said, I apologize for coming off as, asking too many questions or what, but I can count on one finger how many pretty girls from Los Angeles I've had contact me trying to sell me a duck call. So yeah, she thought that was funny, but like I say, ended up making her day, helped pay for over a semester and a half or 2 semesters of college out there somewhere. So she was happy and I was happy, but that's but that's a story that stands out. But I've had many just great stories over the years of pursuing these things.
Wow. To get out of all of the names, it had to be Beckhart. That's hilarious.
It was, and I thought, man, any guy with a heartbeat, pretty girl in a duck call, you're going to get their attention, and so. But it ended up being good, and like I say, and I bought the call for a friend of mine. I already had one, so I was not in the market for one.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a friend, client that I would buy for that was, and so it ended up everything's going smooth. She was happy and I was happy.
Yeah. I'll tell you right now, if a pretty girl from California sent me a picture of her and a Beckhart duck call, my wife would convince me that it was a
Yeah.
a chick from Russia trying to
Yeah.
get money,
Yeah.
or some guy from Russia.
Yeah, and that's what I thought it was. I'm being honest. I even showed my wife. I even showed my wife. I'm like, I said, "You're not going to believe this," and told her all about it. She's like, and he's like, "Well, it seems legit." So I'm pretty smart about this stuff. So I made sure I you know, crossed all my T's and dotted my I's, and made sure I was covered. Just in case something did go south. But everything ended up working well.
Yeah, yeah. That would be so fishy. I mean, oh my gosh. If I'm doing a call trade, or if I'm going to buy a call off of someone, I want it to be like an old dude named Dwayne. Like
Yeah.
also runs a bait and tackle on the side,
Yeah.
That's funny.
Lives on a lake up north, and comes from a hunting family. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, he always posts pictures on Facebook of shooting coots. Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's, well, I mean, when you got into this, I mean, did you? I think it was Chris Beckman. I was talking to him last week, I think it was, and we talked a little bit about Fred Allen a little bit, and I think he told me that you were a big Grubs collector. Am I correct?
Yes. Out of all the old call makers, Grubbs is probably my favorite. Grubbs was a very mysterious character. I mean, he was, literally pretty much the godfather of duck calls as we know them today. As the information that were known, he claims he was the first, to sell duck calls in the commercial market. Fred Allen claims that, he was doing it 5 years earlier. Who's to really say? But Grubbs was just an interesting character. He was, from what I can gather from, all the studying I've done on him, he was probably a hard guy to get along with. He never, at one time he ran a hotel on Senatchewan Lake and, Illinois River, running hunters, and that lasted about a year and a half or so. Then he ended up moving to Chicago and working for Von Langarkey and Antoine, the high-end, men's sporting collectibles store, or it's not sporting collectibles, but sporting goods store. He did that for a little while. Then, he picks up shop and moves to Pascagoula, Mississippi, and gets, and that, I don't know if you're familiar with that area or not, but, the Pascagoula area in southern Mississippi is very famous for factory decoys. He moves down there and kind of gets that part going, down there. Then, and he goes to, into business with another, gentleman down there, and that lasted about a year. Before he picked up shop and moved to Houston, Texas, and and went off on his own. So, it just seems like he was, it just seems like maybe he was a little bit of a bullheaded guy. I'm a little bit of a bullheaded guy myself. So I just think that, if I just think he'd be a fun person to hunt with. And, I've always said if there was three people that I could go back in time and have, share a duck blind with, it'd be Charles Grubbs, Charles Purdue, and Victor Glodo.
I don't even have to ask you that question at the end of the podcast now.
Yeah.
That's one of the main questions.
Really?
Yes, that's awesome.
I wouldn't even load my shotgun because I wouldn't have time. I've just got, after studying this stuff for so many years, I've just got so many questions that, I would love to ask the three of them. It would, like I say, it would sure, settle a lot of debates, that we've had on these things.
Are you sure it wouldn't break out into a fist fight?
Oh no, I'm not gonna break into a fist fight, but
between some of those guys.
Oh yeah, no, I wouldn't want them to all be in the blind at the same time. I wouldn't want them over each other, but I'd like to. I'm talking about 3 different occasions.
Yeah.
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 Because I will tell you, like, you know, I've done a lot of reading on Victor Glodo, and Victor Glodo was a scrapper, you know, like, so, I mean, if something was to, you know, a fight was to break out or something, I would for sure want, for sure want Victor Glodo to have my back.
So was he a pretty big character? It seems like all those old call makers were straight up characters. It's like, even like I heard you on Ramsey Russell's podcast talking about Charles Purdue. What a character!
Yes, he was. You know, he was just a very cantankerous old man. Charles Purdue was. He was a womanizer. He was, you know, he was just not a man. He was not a, you know, I guess he was not a man of his word. You know, he would, you know, he took a lot of orders for things and took a lot of money for things, and you know, ended up never delivering, you know, on a lot of the orders, and caused some animosity. You know, I've got a letter from where he tried to sue, you know, Charles Ditto over a crow call, you know, back in the 1800s. Yeah, so I mean, you know, so I always tell everybody that, you know, I mean, for as much as everybody thinks things were, you know, a lot different back then, you know, it's you know, the level that some of it would be different, but you know, the more you think it's changed, you know, a lot of it's more the same than people would think. You know, but the difference is they just didn't have, you know, social media to you know, to do all their bickering on. You know, they usually handled it, you know, face to face or with lawyers.
Yeah. So, yeah, I've got some just basic Google images of Purdue up right now. Wasn't he a barber?
No, he was not a barber.
Okay, I'm trying to remember who it was that was a barber.
Yeah, no, Jack Batley was a barber.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what Purdue, it's always interesting what some of these guys did before being a full-time call maker. It's always crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Purdue, he was a pusher, you know, the term pusher, a lot of people are not familiar with that term, but it's pretty much what a guide is today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, back then they called them pushers because, you know, they would, you know, had push poles in their boats and they'd stand up and they'd push their sport hunters to where they were going. So they just called them pushers. And, you know, that's still a term used in, you know, a lot of, you know, duck clubs up north and stuff like that. But, you know, I think you know, did a lot of construction, you know, type work, and like I say, he worked on guns and he did just a little bit of everything.
Yeah, but then again, I mean, it was different times back then. Some of those, what years was Purdue making calls?
Well, it's actually stated in the books that he probably made his first calls after 1900. I've actually been able to debunk that because I've got probably one of the earliest Charles Purdue calls that exist. And, you know, and I'd owned this call for, you know, 4 or 5 years. And me and my buddy John Stevens and Blake Fisher, we were going up north to do you know, there for several years, we'd go up north in the summer times and we go to some of these old clubs and, you know, and try to, you know, working on doing R&T TV episodes on some of this stuff. And well, anyways, so, you know, John was looking at the call and he's like, "Did you see the date on the band?" And I'm like, "No." He showed it to me, and you can see where the, you know, the date of 1898 was scratched into the, you know, the sterling silver band. And I had never seen that. And Blake's like, "Man, if John saw that, he's blind as a bat. You know, you should have seen that." And I never had. So that shows that he was at least making them before 1900.
Wow.
And it's pretty much a, you know, I mean, I'm not going to say a given, but it's, you know, it's more than likely, you know, Purdue, you know, got his ideas for duck calls from, you know, Charles Grubbs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
The
the scarcity, we was talking earlier about me being a fan of grub stuff.
uh-huh.
The early grub stuff is so rare, and has so much historical significance that that is one of those that makes it, so sought after by myself. Allen, Fred Allen from Monmouth, he made, he was very early too, but man, he made a lot more duck calls than, than Charles Grubbs. You can pretty much find, it's not hard to find a Fred Allen duck call, but as far as like the Illinois River model Grubbs calls and the improved Illinois River model Grubbs calls, I mean, we're talking less than 10 of these, known to be in collections today.
Oh my gosh. Back in the day I used to collect coins. I remember whenever there were so many coins that were accounted for, but no one, people knew how many were stamped but didn't know where they were. And every time like a coin circulated, it was a big deal. I mean, are there, do you think there's still some of those calls out there that just aren't accounted for?
Absolutely, there is. They, just all the time when you think nothing else is going to show up, like, you know, um, they do,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll tell you, I mean, I've I've never done a hard drug. Well, I've never done drugs in my life, but like I can attribute the feeling to finding a farm fresh duck call is to what, I mean, it's a high, there's just something about finding an old farm fresh call that no other collector has ever laid their hands on,
Yeah.
and hasn't seen the light of day and 80 to, 120 years. That's, to me, that's, that's a high.
It would, especially knowing, if it's tucked back somewhere that someone found. I mean, just realizing that someone had their hands on it in a blind in the 1800s to early 1900s. That's just,
Yeah.
it's just
It's neat.
awesome.
I agree. I mean, so many of the old calls that I have, like, um, I mean, I'll sit up in my den and just look at them and think, man, like, and a lot of them will have, I mean, so many of them are folk art, that the hunter just, would carve on them or whittle on them, and
Hmm.
the duck blind. You just, I just wish that, like the calls could talk and tell you like all the places they've been.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of those call makers, I don't know how many, but I got my hands on a really old Sears and Roebuck catalog, and I was very shocked at how many duck call makers are selling their calls through Sears and Roebuck.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you'll notice on a lot of those too, like, um, the maker of these calls was not overly important back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you'll see very few of them signed. But if you'll notice, a lot of these, big catalogs and, and hardware stores that sold these calls, they, even though we can look at them and know who made them, they didn't advertise who made them back then.
Hmm.
They would, like on the Olds and stuff. But if you sometimes see some of the Grubbs calls or, even some of the Allen calls in them, they would market them as their own. You
Yeah.
know, they wouldn't say, who truly made them. That just wasn't important. And man, I wish that so many of these old call makers would have, signed their calls but they never dreamed that 100 years later there'd be a group of people fascinated by collecting this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, it's were these guys super competitive? Did they know of each other? Were they aware of each other?
I mean, obviously they were because, like I say, I mean, Charles Purdue in 190, I think it's like 1909. Like I say, he sued, Charles Ditto. He had his, I got a copy of the letter from his Purdue's lawyer that he sent Ditto, asking him to stop, making his crow call or legal action would be taken.
Wow.
You know, so I mean, so I don't think many of them, back in those days knew of each other, but but especially the ones that were making calls on the commercial market knew each other. And like I said, you also got to understand there was not, back then when the commercial call makers consisted of the Old Company
Mm-hmm.
and Food, Grubbs, Allen, and like I say, I'm talking about calls that were made for the commercial market. Obviously there's got calls that were made in that time frame, whether it be Turpin or Harry Hooker, Beckhart, they, Turpin, I probably shouldn't put in that category because he was a call maker that had a brand and still, but so many of these, like Beckhart and stuff, that they weren't making duck calls and selling them for the commercial market. James Beckhart was he was a commercial hunter, hunted for the market. But he also, took sports, wealthy businessmen would come down on trains from Chicago and St. Louis and other areas. And, and like I say, his duck calls a lot of times were more likely bought for a memento or a souvenir of their trip, just for instance, like that duck call that I got from that, girl in California, that duck call had probably, I mean, I know it had never been used before. Like, I mean, it was as mint and pristine condition as one as I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
It didn't have all the, a lot of times, like when there's, food build up on old metal reeds or just, just the, just sugars or whatever in your saliva, it'll turn, it'll age the reeds and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. And you tell, like, this call's never had, any saliva on it or any food blown in it or anything.
Mm.
There's just no, just no sign of moisture of any signs on them. When you do find them like that, they'll usually have an old green gunk on them,
Mm-hmm.
where the wet rock will be stuck to the reed from just being, jammed together for so many years. So.
Yeah, I'm looking at I've got Beckhart pulled up. Some of the calls pulled up on the live stream right now. I'm wondering if any of these are yours or one of yours. How do you have a couple of Beckharts?
I have three Beckharts.
Wow,
Um,
they are so pretty.
yeah, they really are.
Was he the first one to do raised panel checkering?
I mean, that's one of those things we'll never know. As far as what collectors know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody will say that, Victor Glotto was, the grandfather of the checkered duck call.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who's to say, who did it first? A lot of that stuff we'll never know.
It's amazing how, I mean, we are literally talking about the grandfathers of duck calls and how that competitiveness is still there today. Like it is it is still there. I mean, there's so much. And I mean, I've looked at metal reed calls where literally it got to a point where you couldn't tell the difference between, like, tell me if I'm wrong, but between like the early 1900s to 1950s, a lot of them looked exactly the same.
Yeah, they did. I mean, you can just usually tell on just aging, but a lot of the I love Tennessee calls as much as the next guy, but a lot of the the stuff, like maybe there was a lot of Tennessee calls made from between 1950 and 1980 that will copy like the the Johnny Marsh style. So those are kind of hard to tell apart
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. You can usually tell. There'll be minute differences and from one call maker to the next, but not much. But like I say, I mean, obviously there was not. There was some call makers that were probably in competition. I know Grubbs and Allen, based on what's known, they were in competition, but it's not as obviously as it was by no means a saturated market like it is today.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about a handful versus maybe 500 to 1,000 makers now. I couldn't even tell you.
Yeah, I couldn't even tell. Yeah, I mean, there's no telling. Like, and I always wonder, like, man, like, if somebody ever thought about the amount of duck calls that have been made in the last, 30 years, it's not like these things have a shelf life and like deteriorate and turn to dust. I mean, there's a lot of duck calls out there, man.
Oh, especially in the last, I used to call them class of 2020 because when COVID happened, so many people were stuck at home and all of them ordered lathes and had lathes dropped off in front of their garage and they started turning duck calls. I'm talking about loads of guys. So, I mean, in the last four years, man, there's been a lot of call makers pop up.
Yeah, there has. Like I say, COVID is when I taught myself how to checker. My wife's a school teacher. I'm a school teacher, and when we're all stuck at home, and I had to find something to do to get out of the house so we didn't kill each other, spending that much time around each other. And my dad had some old checkering tools that I mean, I don't even know where he got them. He collects old guns and stuff. And I was over there one day and saw them. I said, "You mind if I take these with me?" And I took them with me and watched a couple of YouTube videos that weren't a great deal of help, but just figured out how to do it and just found out, this is something I really enjoy doing.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, COVID time when a lot of people started making calls is like when I taught myself how to checker.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you what, like Chris, the Iron and Oak calls, like Chris just put up a call, I think it was like 2 hours ago, maybe 3 hours ago. And man, I love the old school, like it looks like someone used a pocket knife. Like it doesn't look great, but it looks so antique and vintage on the checkering. Oh, I love that look.
Like, what I appreciate about what Chris has done is, I mean, he's come into this, he really kind of come into this as a collector first and a call maker second.
Mm-hmm.
And, and he's got such an appreciation. And I'm not saying others don't, but he's got such an appreciation of the past and learning from the past call makers and just everything was made with tools and everything wasn't perfect.
Yeah.
Very few old duck calls will you ever pick up, like even the nicest ones will be perfect. And there's so many call makers out there right now. You look at these things and I mean, they're flawless and I appreciate that quality of work, but like, but him being a nostalgic person and myself being a nostalgic person, I kind of like the looks of, everything not being, completely mint, and another thing that I appreciate about Chris is, he's not trying to copy somebody, an old call maker, and John Stevens is the same way when, he started making his Jay Stevens calls. He didn't want to make exact copies. He wanted to make calls that were influenced by call makers from the past.
Yeah.
And that's what I appreciate about what John's done, and what I appreciate about what Chris is doing is just, just incorporating the past into their craft. Making calls like they used to.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited. Hopefully, I'm going to see Chris and his partner Logan at Reelfoot in October. I'm really looking forward to it. And I think I almost got him talked into entering one of his calls into the competition, call makers competition. So we'll see how that goes. I hope I talked him into it. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, he really should. Like I said, I mean, I appreciate what he's done. Like, he contacted me a little over, a year ago about some old calls and stuff, and we've really formed a pretty close friendship and bond. And I mean, he's as, it's always comforting for me to see, guys get into this stuff for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many people that get into this stuff for monetary reasons only, and I'll be honest with you, like, I mean, that gets old and takes a toll on you, like when it comes to wanting to deal with people all that much.
It does.
For somebody to call you and have a general interest in wanting to build an old duck call collection, and and like I say, he hit all those marks.
Yeah, I try not to take orders just because of that, because it will burn you out so quickly. And I mean, it's kind of a job for me, but not real. I mean, I've got 1 foot in and 1 foot out, honestly. But when you have all those orders, man, it just duck calls. I like to keep it fun. I just enjoy them,
Yeah, exactly. Like I say, in the collecting thing for me, like, it started out as a hobby, and and it still is a hobby to an extent. But I mean, I would have never have in a million years, like when I started, collecting this stuff, that I think that it would, turn into what it has today. Like, because, I mean, I've helped so many other people build their collections, and and like I say, and I do a lot of stuff for, authenticating stuff, appraising value and stuff for auction houses and stuff like that. I mean, I would just never have thought, when I started doing that, I mean, I would get to the point where, and like I say, and it all happened organically too. I mean, I never, set out to have, but what I did set out to have is the best of what I had the means to get. And
yeah.
And it's funny, like, my collecting started in the, the late 90s, and, and that's when I was in college and all that. So, I mean, I haven't, even though I was as into it as I ever have, there was times when I was in college, I mean, 2 or 3 different times in college, I sold what I had, built up for the most part collecting wise, just like any other college kid. I didn't have any money, and, just to get by. And, but, back then, that era was, and I was very fortunate, and I had no foresight into the future of this stuff, but I was just able to get into it early when, before prices skyrocketed, and before social media, and the, a lot of the stuff that I came across, was, I'd find it on eBay. This is eBay back in the late 90s when it first started. I always tell the story that, I mean, I remember I was at Western Illinois University in Macomb, Illinois, and I would rush back to my dorm. I'd write on my hand when something was going off, and I'd rush back into my dorm, make sure I got there like 45 minutes before, because I'd have to, we didn't have high-speed internet. We had dial-up, so you live in a dorm, you might have to wait 30 minutes before you can get on. And like I say, and there was no auction snipers or anything like that. Like, you had to do everything. So, and back then, I mean, eBay was not popular. I mean, it was popular with pickers, but, it just was not, it had not grown to the level that it has today. So, I mean, I was able to find, between, I say, probably 98 to when the Facebook came out, with some really the glory years of finding old duck calls. So.
Yeah. I could see as being a call collector, if you got like one of those unknowns, man, all it takes is for you to get a letter or get a journal or something that proves that call is one of these call makers. Or do you ever like try to just buy up some old like letters from duck call makers, or just memorabilia like that?
It's funny you say that, because I probably have one of the most extensive library of original paperwork and stuff related to old call makers that probably exist. I've I've chased that stuff as hard as I've chased old duck calls, and I never pass any of it up. I mean, my early mentor, Bob Christensen, that wrote the book Duck Calls of Illinois. He was a very studious person himself, and he was all into that stuff too. So I was very lucky to get all that from him about 15 years ago. So, but no, I have a very extensive collection of early paperwork. I've got binders full of early 1900s paperwork from Tom Turpin, and I've got original letters from Purdue, original letters from Grubbs, original letters from Allen, ditto. So much of this stuff, so much of the stuff that come from the families of the call makers that Bob contacted when he was making this stuff, when he was writing the book. But like I say, I collect that stuff just as much as I collect the old calls.
Wow. Wow. And I mean, man, that would be so cool. I bet. Do you have any old pictures? I mean, any old black and whites of that? Any of those guys?
Yes, I do. I've got a lot.
Nice.
Yeah, in my Turpin collection, Turpin, in the late 1920s, he wrote a manual, how to blow a duck. I forget what the name of it, how to blow a duck call or whatever it was. But, and like all the original pictures that were used to make that, I have all the originals. And, but yeah, I have a lot of, I collect old hunters' journals, just not even call makers, but, just old hunting pictures. Yep, I have a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. How have you seen any just hunting was crap today? Have you seen any of those?
Well, it's interesting you ask that because I've got a journal from an old duck hunter from the late 1930s, early 1940s.
Wow.
Along the Illinois River, and it's very interesting to read because like I said earlier, like a lot of times we think things have changed a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but when you have written proof from the past that and you go to reading this stuff, you realize that it hasn't really changed as much as you really thought it has. You read these journal entries that he's got, and it'll talk about didn't see much flying today, wouldn't react to calling, saw some high birds, but some flight birds, but nothing, nothing low. So everybody knows the stories that their granddads and all passed down. And like I say, I think obviously times were great back then, but I mean, just like old fishing stories, I think that they all fishing and hunting stories, they all they all grow legs. The longer legs, the older they get.
Yeah.
So things weren't all as much different as we think they were.
And I love how guys like to, and I'm guilty of it. I love the nostalgia. I love, I would love to hunt over wooden decoys with nothing but metal reeds and a double-barreled shotgun. Maybe even some canvas waders. I just love that old school stuff. But once in a while you see something like the duck decoy that has a duck call drilled out or drilled into its beak, and it has a air plume, and those guys are pumping it, and it's like, man, those guys were trying anything like these mojos today. They were trying anything to try to get it up on the other guys.
Yeah, I mean, everybody was always doing what they could to be more successful. Like I say, I mean, same philosophy back then. It's just at a different level today.
Yeah.
To say that, I don't, I've got, all these old duck calls. I've never taken any of them hunting. Really never had too much of an interest. And, there might have been a time when I was younger that, I thought I might want to wear, I remember wearing, old Podsman cold waders, but I can tell you at 46 this winter, I mean, there's not going to be a time I'm sitting out there in the cold, standing in the water, that I wish I had old, canvas waders on.
Yeah. Luckily, I the first pair I of waders I ever had was a hand me down of canvas waders, and how they stay good since the 70s is beyond me. But man, never again. Those are super cold.
Yeah, I'll guarantee it.
Yeah.
I get a lot colder the older I get. I can tell you that.
Yeah, it's the new technology they have in waders, all this stuff. Why not take advantage of it? It's
Absolutely, I will say one thing about back in those days, to go back where things weren't always much different. Like, those guys were they were shooting the best shotguns that they could, and they were wearing the best waders on the market. Everybody says like they were wearing the Sitka or the Shin Gear or the Avery banded stuff. They were wearing that stuff that was equivalent to their time frame.
Yeah. This is very controversial, but I'm going to go ahead and say it, and I'm going to catch flack for it from either side. If you would have put a piece of acrylic in Purdue, Beckhart, or Grubb's hands and put it in their hands, and do you think they would have turned it into a duck call to get over on the other guys?
Well, I mean, a lot of these guys were in business, and the goal of a business is to make money. If they could have thought they could have made money by doing so, I guarantee it they would have.
Yeah. Yeah. You get that today. Everyone's trying to do something different, or have their own little market in the coal market that's going to grab someone's eye, something that no one else is doing, and that's just how it is. And every day someone's coming up with something new, but we forget, as a coal maker, these coal makers I'm friends with, most of these guys forget to look back at the Beckharts, the Grubbs, the Purdues.
I always, I say I stay off of, I have an Instagram page and stuff like that, but I don't spend much time on Facebook groups, because I'll tell you, I've been at this, long enough that, that I know better than what some of these guys are saying. Like, these, a lot of these call makers today that, they think that they're doing something, revolutionary or changing something. I mean, give me a break. Like, these J-frame style calls and all that. I mean, yeah, you might, bore one just a little bit bigger, but I'll guarantee it. I mean, you're not the first person to do that, and everybody wants to think that they're the ones that are, have come up with something new or tricked, but then if they see it again, somebody else copied them. I mean, it's just nonsense. There's,
Yeah, but we didn't talk about your history as a waterfowl hunter, and just, you're friends with John Stevens. You've hunted with the Powers. You've hunted at Grounds Club with Grounds. You've got a rich history, but not once did you bring it up before now. So you're around so much waterfowl history. I forget where I was going with this, but it's, some like Grounds. Daggone, the man invented the not short reed. Daggone, what was it called, Ryan? It's still around. They still make them.
I don't know if I'm familiar with anything Tim invented. I can tell you a lot of things he made better. Like I say, the short reed stuff was kind of
half-breed.
The half-breed. Yeah, but like I say, the half-breed is still a short reed model call that, kind of based off the, what the Hesses did.
Yeah.
But what Grounds did do is, Grounds took he made everything better.
Yeah.
Tim was a character, man. I remember, Tim's shop was, 15 minutes north of my house, where I was born and raised, and where all my family's still from. And I can still remember as a 16-year-old kid, like driving around his neighborhood, for 30 minutes before I, had worked up the nerve to go up and knock on his door, and I did. You know, invited me inside, and we watched college football together for an hour.
What?
And I mean, but that's just how Tim was. Tim was Tim was a character. Like, he was, um, you know, you know, Tim gets some bad rap on some things, but people don't realize. I mean, and there's very few people out there that had a heart as big as what Timmy had, and like I say, and I knew Tim. We were friends. I mean, I'm not going to say I knew him as well or more than some people did, but and one thing that when I moved away in 2006, Tim always told me to, if I ever wanted to come back home and hunt, I always had a place, and that's one of the things I regret is that I never took him up on that. But we still talk from time to time. But Tim was a great guy, and I mean, as far as competition calling and all that stuff, I mean, he revolutionized the sport. I mean, it wouldn't be where it's at today without him.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Anyone that's watching this right now, here in a little bit, we're going to close this episode out. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section, and we will ask Ryan any questions about old school duck calls. If you have any, shoot them. Yeah, I will take a couple of them, but we're getting pretty close to the end. But one question that I had, that I was asked to ask you, Ryan, is Chris Beckman. I was talking to him, and he goes, man, and I've actually been working on one. He's been looking into it. It's kind of the big mystery in call making. I don't know if you know a lot about them because I don't think they were metal reed, but do you know anything about Catahoula calls?
A little bit, like say, I mean, the Catahoula calls, the Yules and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that I'm familiar with were metal reed calls, and like I say, I'm not familiar with, and Catahoula is one of those areas like Reelfoot. There's probably a plethora of old, hunters around there that made their old calls, and there's probably a ton of old duck calls that are, that are unknown duck calls that are in people's collections that, probably originated from Catahoula Lake.
Mm-hmm.
That was, a very popular destination for, kind of I've never hunted there. I've never been there. But I know I've read a lot about it, and I've always had a lot of interest in it. But as far as I know, like, there was not anything, vastly different than, other areas of falls, like, just, metal reed duck falls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was pretty much a regional thing around Catahoula Lake. So there were just probably some families that made those calls around there.
Yeah, like I say, and I mean, that's not just Catahoula Lake. I mean, that's any area that was, popular with waterfowling. The Illinois River, Reelfoot Lake, Big Lake, the Stuttgart area, the coast of, coastal Louisiana, coastal, Mississippi, like, I mean, all those areas. I mean, what a lot of people don't understand where all these old unknown duck calls come from is, you could go to a hardware store and you could find you could find a, if you're lucky, maybe find a Grubs, but based on the very few that have shown up, they weren't widely available. You can find Allens and stuff, but, and back then, they'd sell for 50 cents or $1. That was a lot of money. And, people just would, would just make their own,
mm-hmm.
And that's where a lot of these unknowns come up from. And now there is some unknown calls that I've got. I've got a few unknowns, and one of them says L&A duck calls on it. One says B&B duck calls on it. They're both old. I couldn't tell you who L&A is, and I couldn't tell you who B&B was, but you can just tell by the craftsmanship of them that the people made several calls. That just information's just lost the time.
That's
But
that sucks. And until someone comes forward with an old news article or some letters or
well, I wrote an article years ago for, there was an old, there were some old duck calls out there that, I mean, they were very folky, kind of crude, and I would have bet $1 million that we would have never found the maker on them. I forget what year it was, but John Dieter from Guy at Dieter contacted me, and somebody from Oklahoma had consigned some calls, and there was a pamphlet with it, and then the pamphlet was called "Ham the Duck Call Man." The guy's name was H.A. Mansker from East St. Louis, Illinois, and by God, there's the duck calls that we've all referred to as the groovy calls for years. So,
wow.
I mean, there's not been many situations like that,
Mm-hmm.
but but who's to say that that's not going to, happen more with time? Right now, a lot of the stuff I feel like is probably, the baby boomer generation has a lot of stuff, and as they get up there in years, there's probably going to be
Yep.
influx, and I think right now we're just kind of in a dead area or dead period for that kind of stuff. But I feel like there'll be the next 10, 15 years there'll probably be more of that happen than has happened in the last 30 or so. But I look forward to it, as a historian of this stuff and somebody that's as passionate about it as I am. Like, any information I can, because I'm very knowledgeable about this stuff, but I will never claim to know everything, because I don't.
Yeah.
I will say, and if I don't know what I'm talking about, I won't talk about it. One of the things that drives me nuts is when people talk about things that they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I mean, in about 10 or 15, like you said, in about 10 or 15 years, because one thing a lot of people don't know about me is my mother-in-law got me into like sewing machines, love singers, all that stuff. So whenever I'm out picking or at a place, I can spot them, right? And I can do a quick flip on them. But I mean, it's amazing how many people throw out a old singer or an old sewing machine that is worth money and they have no idea. It was just grandma's, and they just got it out of the attic and they just won it out. And
actually, that was more. That still is going to happen today, and there's still all. But to the extent that stuff happened before the World Wide Web and social media, was pretty intense. But it's there'll still always be stuff like that, but not at a rate that it used to be.
Yeah.
Now, like just like that girl that I got the Beckhart duck call from. I mean, she didn't even know what it was, but she knew it had JT Beckhart stamped on the top of it, so she put it into Google. If there hadn't been Google or the internet, I mean, she'd have probably thrown it away or sold it for $5 at the yard sale.
And you get that. You get people that just don't care. It's a duck call. If before I got into duck hunting, if someone would have handed me a duck call, I would have had no interest. I don't know how to blow it, no interest, but once you get into the culture, you keep your nose to the ground on that stuff. So
yeah, exactly. That's why, to us that are into this stuff, like, it just seems like second nature. But think about how odd it is to tell somebody that you don't know that you collect old duck calls. I mean, that just sounds odd.
Well, at least you don't get what I get when I tell people I'm a call maker, and they say, "Are you going to be the next Duck Dynasty?" Like,
yeah,
a dime a dozen, I swear. Like, that's all people say. But I hope that'd be nice. That'd be really nice. But yeah. So no one asked any questions. That was really the main question that Chris Beckman had for me to ask you. Yeah, man, thank you so much. It is just an honor to have you on and just talk. We really just scratched the surface. I mean, this is stuff that you could talk about for hours. But I really appreciate it. But did you have anything you want to bring up before we do the last three questions and end it?
Man, no, I really don't. But I mean, just appreciative that you asked me to do it, and just always, I always enjoy talking to old duck calls. Like just always enjoy seeing new people get into the hobby, and just want to express to people that collecting is a very fun hobby. You know, the people you meet and interact with, and you know, I had a guy not too long ago. He asked me if you have to collect this. I mean, it is valuable, but you have to collect this stuff because you have an interest in it. And I had a guy not too long ago ask me that if I thought this stuff was going to be worth anything in 30, 40 years, and I told him, I said, I honestly don't. I can't really say. I hope, because I hope for my family's sake that it is, but I can tell you this right now: it's a lot better investment than drinking alcohol and going to strip clubs and stuff like that. So,
Yep. Yes, and I don't know, man. Like duck calls in general are just can be highly addictive. So
they are, and it's hard to explain. I mean, it's hard to even explain to myself like why they are. But for me, the fascination with them is, first and foremost, I'm a duck hunter, and
yeah,
and I would not be collecting this stuff if I wasn't a duck hunter. And it's just, I mean, really the only hobby I have is waterfowl hunting. I don't fish, and I don't deer hunt. I don't turkey hunt. I duck hunt. I duck hunt a lot, and I check duck calls. So
yeah, that's awesome. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. I have the last 3 questions. You already answered one of them, but I'll have you answer it again. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. If you could go in a time machine and go back to a hunt and do it all over again, what would it be?
Yeah, like I say, I mean, I would love to, on separate hunts, I would love to, to hunt with Victor Glodo, Charles Grubbs, Tom Turpin.
I was talking about a hunt you've done in the past.
Oh, a hunt I've done in the past? Oh, it's crazy. I mean, I've been very fortunate to hunt, all over North America. But man, like, there's nothing I enjoy more than hunting here at home.
Yeah.
I mean, if I never hunted another place besides where I hunt here at home, I'd be perfectly happy.
Cool. And now, the second question: if you could hunt blind with 3 people of all time, anytime, who would be?
I say Victor Glodo, Charles Grubbs, Charles Purdue. If I could name a 4th one, it would be Tom Turpin.
Cool. Awesome. Now, the last question: if you could stand over the shoulder of any duck call maker of all time and watch him make a duck call, who would it be?
Probably Charles Grubbs, without a doubt. Like I say, my interest is not in making duck calls, but I'd at least like to, stand over his shoulder and talk to him about why he's doing, how he got to where he's at that point. I guess would be something I would want to know, because those are the questions I have.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for calling in. It's been an honor. If you could do me a huge favor, and next time you talk to Phil Conkey, please say I said thank you for inspiring me to get into waterfowl podcasting.
Yep, I will, absolutely. Phil is a great guy, and I'll tell you, he's a killer too, man. Like, he puts everything he's got into his hunting, and like saying that's why we get along so well. He's just a good dude. So I will definitely tell him, and appreciate you having me on. I'm going to go watch the Cardinal game.
Well, if you don't mind, could you hang around right while I close her out? I got just a couple questions for you real quick.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, so everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been Rilo's Quack Chat. Make sure to tune in next week. I don't know exactly for sure who's going to be on next week, but you will see promo pictures, everywhere. Thank you. And also, if you want to watch this on YouTube now and watch on your big screen TV, the comfort of your couch, you can. So everyone, thank you so much.